In the wake of the 11th century, at the heart of what is today West Africa, an empire sprang up with unparalleled grandeur, the Benin Empire. It blossomed into a beacon of arts, governance, and military prowess. The 15th and the 16th centuries, marking the zenith of Benin's splendor. Under the reigns of Oba the Great, Ozoloa, and Oba Sige, the empire expanded its territories and influence, engaging in prosperous trade with European merchants, the Portuguese in particular. This empire became the key player in the trade between the West African peoples in the hinterlands and these European merchants, with ivories, pepper, palm oil, and slaves in popular demand. And these kings were correctly to expanding the territories of this great empire, wielding eastwards and taking lands from the western city-states, stretching through to what is today Eastern Ghana. And just as we know it, empires rise and empires fall, and you can ask Rome and Greece. This was the fate of the great Benin Empire of old. An empire that rose to a position of glory and absolute power. It kind of favored due from its election by powers unseen. Benin profited greatly from tributes of the numerous vassal states of the vast empire. It was the dealings in slaves and other merchandise by the Europeans. Stomachs became big, and pockets deeper, no doubt. But as time strode by, the twilight of this vast empire strolled in, and the fall of it was great. That an empire that once basked in what seemed to be an eternal glory came tumbling down in the shadow of itself, owing to all of various reasons. Reasons such as the halt of the transatlantic slave trade, the scramble for Africa, and the racist philosophy of the white man's burden preconceived, and ultimately the so-called Benin Massacre. The empire's involvement in slave trade predates the coming of the Europeans. These enslavements, primarily focusing on war captives and tributes from vassal states. The sale of these slaves to the Europeans consequently proved a strong source of wealth for this empire. But as the transatlantic slave trade, a brutal chapter in human history came to a halt, so did one major source of wealth of the great Benin Empire. To set the list of the refusal of the vassal states in the compliance of the yearly tributes. The rise of the European imperial ambition cast long shadows over Benin's sovereignty. The scramble for Africa and the philosophical conjecture of the perceived white man's burden, preconceived as it may. Driven by the Second Industrial Revolution, the whole of Africa was chopped up like a piece of cake among 7 European nations in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. An era of what is called neo-imperialism. The entire African continent was divided amongst the nations of Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom, all for conquest and exploitations, or what they call the white man's burden, preconceived to drag Africa to a world of civilization, even though unsolicited. But the big questions remains. Was a white man commissioned to do this a case of God's benevolence to mankind, or a case of pure greed and insatiable ambition on the flip side? Well, it turned out that the immediate cause of the Benin expedition of 1897 was the Benin Massacre. January 1897. The Benin Massacre, an action of retribution against the incision and recalcitrant pestering by the British. A party led by James Philip, acting Consul General of the Niger Coast Protectorate, 250 men strong in an adventure of no return. They set out with an intention to enforce an earlier trade agreement secured by the Captain Henry Galway. A venture of intimidation, manipulation by the British in the guise of peace and trade talks. Whereas in actuality, the mission was to enforce the earlier trade agreement, equal as they are, as the king had been tricked into signing off his territory under the protectorate of Her Majesty the Queen of England, the terms of which the Oba was not keeping supposedly. And this mission was to be achieved by any means possible, having weapons of different calibers concealed in boxes for defense in any case of eventualities. And then the untold happened. Alan Boiswagon, one of the two survivors of the Benin Massacre of January 1897. In the following account of our escape from the awful Benin Massacre, I have tried to keep away from all questions of politics and policy, and to give my own opinion as literal as possible. Benin seems to have been the kingdom from time immemorial, anyway from before its first discovery by the Portuguese, somewhere at the end of the 14th or beginning of the 15th century. By their discoveries, the Portuguese for a long time had all the benefits of trade to be obtained from West Africa. They were followed some time after by the Dutch and Swedes. It was not till the year 1552 that the English began to visit these parts, and in 1588, Queen Elizabeth granted a charter to an African company of English merchants, who thereupon started trading all over the west coast of Africa, much to the annoyance of the Dutch and the Portuguese. And so it was that Philip's adventure was arranged to start shortly after the new year. And to give notice of this, messengers were sent to the king a short time before the date, and to gift him a small present. But this message did not go down well with the king, as he was performing the ritual of his father's burial rites, or the Igwe festival as some may have it. Then the king sent a dispatch to tell Philip and his crew that he wasn't disposed to receiving them at the moment, that he was kept incommunicado at the moment by the demands of the foregoing ceremony. But however, he was pleased by the unexpected gift that was sent him, and that in a month or two, he would inform them of his availability and would be pleased to receive just one white man, now in the person of Philip and Vonishakiri chief. Now, it is worthy of note that the Omo was in places to spare the whites in his domain because of what they have reportedly done to Nana of Ishekiri and Jajao Obu, two great chiefs deposed unjustly, in spite of several warnings to Philip from all sides not to go to Benin at that time. He remained defiant. Chief Dore, before he left us, thought as the Benin men meant to stop our getting to Benin City and tried to persuade Philip not to go on. But as I have said before, all the jackeries feared the Benin City men so much that we thought nothing of its advice or warning. But so it was. A party of 250 men, completely annihilated, saving just 2 white men or so, who had managed to escape. But was that all? Didn't think so. February 1897. The Benin punitive expedition started in earnest. A national retribution against the Benin people. Under the command of Rear Admiral Harry Rossin, commander of the Royal Navy Force at the Cape of Good Hope and the west coast of Africa Station. The aim was to invade and capture the Oba of Benin and his army. With a force of 1,200 Royal Marine, sailors and Niger Coast Protectorate forces, comprising a contingent of both Yorubas, Hausas, the whole of the crewmen and Ghanaians. The expedition ignited, with the force organized into 3 columns. The main column was to start from a place called Warigi, a few miles below Sapele. Then the Guato column, and the Jemisi River column, or the Saboba column. The number of men mustered for this expedition totaled a little above 5,000, and this includes carriers and stewards. The main column was to advance to Benin City by what is called the Logbo route, on the Logi Creek, a distance of about 22 miles from Benin City. This column was commanded by Rear Admiral Harry Rossin himself. But before the main British column advanced, 2 flanking columns had been sent by the Admiral. This was to draw away the Benin soldiers' attention from the main attack and to stop any fugitive escaping from Benin City. Meanwhile, far away on the western flank, the Guato Creek column had Captain Callaghan in command. Captain McGill's force proceeded up the Jameson River as far as Sapmamba, landed there and marched to a place some 4 miles north of Sapmamba, where there were crossroads from Benin City. There they built a stockade, and on the 11th February, this stockade was attacked by the Benin forces from the dense bush which surrounded it, with a little defeat on the British side. After this, the stockade was reinforced and strengthened. The Benin men again attacked on the 20th. But as they did not seem to care about coming to close quarters, there were no casualties. However, the same day, they attacked the column proceeding back to Sapmamba and killed 1 Marine and wounded 2 others. On the 10th February, Captain Okalagan from the Gwato column burnt down Gelegele, the frontier Benin City village, and then proceeded on to Gwato. After searching the bush, with volleys and some rounds from quick firing gun from the boat, Captain Okalagan landed with a force of about 80 men. While they were engaged in burning the town, they were attacked by a strong force of Benin men, who fought most pluckily and gallantly from the bush for nearly an hour. Although a number of them were seen to fall, they haven't heard about enough of it to withdrew. There were no deaths recorded on the British side this day, save for some fatal injuries. 14th February, the column went back to Gelegele, where they made a town fence to secure their camp. However, being reinforced, they advanced again to Gwato once more and occupied it. For 2 days, the Benin men attacked them from the bush, but with little success, as only 3 men were slightly wounded. Once the Benin lost several and eventually never attacked at all after the 18th. Meanwhile, on the 25th February, a company of the Protectorate Force, under Captain Galway, arrived at Gwato from Benin City, without having been attacked once, which showed that the taking of Benin City had a great effect on the Beninese. Captain Okalagan mustered his force and left Gwato on the 27th February to return to the main column. On the other hand, the main column had to fight its way through 22 miles of dense bush country, along a narrow uncleared path that only admitted marching in single file, and almost unceasingly attacked by an unseen enemy who used to creep up within 20 yards of the path before firing. The advance of the main column began at daylight on the 12th February. On account of the swamps opposite Ilogbo, the British force was conveyed by water, and there was only one steam launch at Ilogbo at the commencement of the attack, which towed 2 small boats and some canoes. Owing to these circumstances, only a comparatively small number of men could be taken to Ilogbo at one time. The first detachment to start was at once attacked by the Benin soldiers from the bush, with a couple of fatal injuries recorded on the British side. As soon as the successive detachment arrived, the Benin forces were driven back, and soon they occupied the Benin village of Ilogbo. The advance guard started off again at daybreak on the 14th, and after proceeding some distance, met with a strong resistance from the Benin forces. This was until they reached a place where there were crossroads, and where the Benin forces had apparently made their main camp. Here, 2 of the British officers were severely wounded. From Ilogbo as far as a place called Agagi, the Benin soldiers had cut a path in the bush parallel to the main path. This was to be used as an ambush path. They evidently were under the impression that the British force would get no further than Agagi, as the ambush path is there. This ambush path became an excellent thing for the British force, as it enabled 2 columns to proceed at the same time, and only necessitating a guarding of one flank by each column. On the 15th February, the advance guard did not start till noon, but soon after starting, they were attacked from both sides. The attack gradually extended the whole length of the column. This went on till they reached the Benin camp at Adagi village soon after 3 p.m. Here again, the British suffered a little loss. On the 17th, the main column reached another village called Awuku, 7 miles away from Agagi, having had a running fight nearly all day. These fights went on without casualty from both sides. (18th February), the column started for its final dash on Benin City. As soon as the advance guard started, they were met with a heavy fire from the back by the Benin soldiers, and this continued the whole day. ending with a heavy blow on the British. The British soldiers recorded a number of casualties, but ultimately the British had them cornered. About 300 yards further on, a small village was reached, and as Benin City was reported as being near, the British fired some shells from 7-pounders and rockets in the direction the city was supposed to be. With so much precision that the next day, some of the rockets' heads and the effects of the explosion of the shells were found in the city close to the king's compound. The king and his men were still in Benin at this time of the barrage. But as the intensity of it was too much, the king and his cohort had to take over. However, Benin proper was still a couple of distance away, say 1,000 yards. But now, coming out to a much broader street, that led to the king's palace. The Benin soldiers showed great determination, with a party of them charging at the head of the British column as it arrived at the open broad road. On arriving at the broad road, the advance guard formed into a square. As the square advanced, it was met with a tremendously hot fire from both sides of the road. The Benin soldiers took every advantage of their cover from the bush, with some of them on trees aiming at better shots. However, the British force made capital rook shooting and killed several of the Benin forces in the trees. The Benin soldiers also had several cannons firing from the king's palace. 200 yards from the city, the Benin column broke into a chair and charged. The Benin soldiers retreated, and Benin City was taken by 2 p.m. The king's compound was occupied by the British troops for the night. The casualties this day on the British side had been quite heavy, though the fight ended with a British victory, and thus won the downfall of a once glorious empire of all time. Severely battered and shattered by a relentless bombardment of the British cannonballs on the withering hails of bullets from a Massacre gun. This expedition took Benin City on the 18th February.